We know that you will get us going, get us energized, and get us ready for this election. This election is critical. This election is one of the most important, if not the most important, of our lifetime. And we need each and every one of you to be in the fight for justice and equality. So you'll hear from our panelists. You'll hear how you can participate. You may be already all in, but if you're not, I hope by the time that you leave this webinar, you will be all in and stand with us to fight for justice on the front line. We want to make sure that we're increasing voter engagement, education, and empowerment. Together, we know we are up for the challenge because political engagement, first of all, is rooted in the DNA of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, whose first act as an organization was participated in the women's suffrage movement in 1913. But we know that it takes all of us. The stakes are high. Our freedom is on the line. It's a moment that demands our attention and action, not just for the presidential race, but up and down the ballot. So thank you to not only my Saras of Delta Sigma Theta who have joined us this evening. Thank you to all of our brothers who joined us this evening as well. We look forward to hearing from you so that we understand your views on what is important to you, your families, and the communities where you live and serve during this election. We hope tonight's discussion ignites a fire within each of us to ensure that all of us are engaged. Our brothers and our sisters are engaged, not only in this election, but elections in years to come. The call to action is clear. Let's rise and continue to blaze the trail of social action with unwavering fortitude. And when we leave this webinar tonight, let's make sure that we do something. We are doing the work between now and November 5th. Let's continue to remain on the front lines of justice. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sara President. So it is my honor to introduce our stellar panel for this evening. So my sisters of Delta, my other sisters who have joined us, and our brothers, sit back, take out your pens and pencils, take some notes. Be sure to put questions and answers, or questions, I should say, in the Q&A panel. And for those of you joining on Facebook, please put questions there and we'll be sure to capture those. So I want to start with our moderator for this evening. We have Mr. Demario Cooper, who is the co-executive director at the Center for Popular Democracy. He is an Ohio-based grassroots organizer with deep roots in both racial justice and electoral campaigning at the local, state, and national levels. From housing to healthcare and criminal justice reform to economic opportunity access, Demario has been on the front lines of many fights for justice for over 15 years. Demario was formerly the national organizing director of Black PAC, a political action committee dedicated to engaging and mobilizing Black voters across the country. Demario holds a Bachelor of Arts and Science from Kent State University, focusing on Pan-African studies and anthropology. He has also been a professional organizer for over 15 years, primarily helping build power with the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. He's run local and statewide organizing campaigns, has been a canvasser, canvassing lead organizer, organizing director for local and statewide offices, and executive director and national organizing director. Demario resides in Akron, Ohio. Mr. Cooper has a lot of valuable information to share as he has been on the front lines, and we welcome him as our moderator. Our next panelist will be Mr. W. Mondale Robinson. He currently serves as the principal for the Black Male Voter Project. He founded the Black Male Voter Project, whose work is to increase the number of Black men that are super voters. As the only national organization that solely focuses on the voting habits of Black men, the project was launched because they saw the shortcomings in current techniques as methods of reaching Black men who were not super voters. Traditional campaigning is insufficient to expand the universe of sporadic or low information Black men that participate in the electoral process. Mr. Robinson has worked on more than 160 campaigns, local, statewide, federal, and international. He also led #AllAction, an online organizing group specializing in tech community organizing, training for successful civil disobedience actions, and strategic advocacy planning. With appearances on television news programs such as Democracy Now!, Al Jazeera, NPR, ABC, MSNBC, and others, and his political and cultural columns on the Village Celebration, he has become a leading voice in what moves Black men. Mr. Robinson has a Bachelor of Arts degree from Livingstone College in political science and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Arkansas. Since 2022, Mr. Robinson is the mayor of Enfield, North Carolina, which is a small southern town just north of Rocky Mount, North Carolina, in the eastern part of the state. We welcome you, Mr. Robinson, and look forward to your insights. We now introduce to you, no stranger to Delta Sigma Theta, is Mr. Wade Henderson. Wade Henderson is the principal of Wade J. Henderson, LLC, and he serves as an advisor to major corporations and nonprofits on matters relating to civil and human rights. He currently serves as a senior advisor for the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and the Leadership Conference Education Fund, organizations he previously led for more than 20 years. The Leadership Conference is the nation's premier civil and human rights coalition, charged by its diverse membership of more than 200 national organizations, of which Delta Sigma Theta was one of the founding members, to promote and protect the civil and human rights of all persons in the United States. Under his stewardship, the Leadership Conference became one of the nation's most effective organizations in advocating for progressive civil and human rights policies. Mr. Henderson is well known for his expertise on a wide range of civil rights, civil liberties, and human rights issues, and is the author of numerous articles on civil rights and public policy. Prior to his role with the Leadership Conference, Mr. Henderson was the Washington Bureau Director of the NAACP, Associate Director of the Washington National Office of the ACLU, and Executive Director of the Council on Legal Education Opportunity. Mr. Henderson is a graduate of Howard University and the Rutgers University School of Law and holds several honorary doctorates. He is a member of the bars of the District of Columbia and the U.S. Supreme Court. Mr. Henderson is also a proud member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. Welcome back, Mr. Henderson. We certainly look forward to the gems you're going to drop this evening. We appreciate you joining us. So I will now turn the conversation over to Mr. Cooper to get us started. Mr. Cooper?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. And thank you, Sisters of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. It is really a pleasure for me to be here. I'm sure it's a pleasure for both Mr. Henderson and Brother Robinson to be here. We know we want to have a conversation about Black men, but I really want to start by just grounding us in sort of a connection to this current political moment. And the way that we normally talk about this is we're in a clapback moment. These clapback moments have happened throughout American history, and they happen when Black people reach a level of political power that frightens the larger society, and then they clap back. The first one happens after the Reconstruction Amendments. If you don't know what that is, that's the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment of the Constitution. 13th says a human can't own a human. Doesn't mean that the state can't own a human and lease it to a human, but that's another conversation. The 14th, the 14th Amendment says that if you are born in the United States of America, you are a citizen. You have the rights and protections as a citizen. That's the 14th Amendment. It's important to understand the 14th Amendment, partially because it is a reaction to the fact that there were 4 million people who were enslaved, meaning they literally were property, like a lawnmower or, you know, a pair of shoes, right? But those people, there was a civil war in this country. Another little fact about that civil war in this country is that those same people who were enslaved were the folks who actually won that war, right? Like the Black people who were informally enslaved are the reason why the Civil War was won, because they escaped from bondage, and then they joined the Union Army and then fought their masters in order for themselves to fight for liberation. Now, there's a lot of other politics happening, but that is a thing that you should know. And if you think I'm lying, I had to grab this book off my bookshelf, go get this book. This is W.E.B. Du Bois, Black Reconstruction. It will tell you the truth. Go get this book, go find it, go read it. And then the 15th Amendment gave Black men the right to vote. And at the time, it was just Black men because the women's suffrage movement and women don't get the right to vote to the 19th Amendment. But when Black men get the right to vote, like 98% of Black men go and vote. And what happens is between the time like 1869, 1868 to about 1876, there is like a flurry of Black voting and civic participation, which results in electing senators to the Congress, meaning the U.S. Congress, state Congress. People are electing folks at local level, sheriffs, they're electing people all up and down the line. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because there's something called a great compromise after a contested election that results in the Union removing troops from the South. And then the Ku Klux Klan gets formed to kill Black men, to murder them, and to reinstitute the former Confederate kind of ideology. Why is that important? Because today is October 15th. And y'all already heard that I do Pan-African studies in anthropology, which means, you know, I know dates. I'm sort of a nerd like that. So October 15th is the day in 1875, was the day where a Supreme Court that was a captured radical Supreme Court, 1883, they shut down and struck down the Civil Rights Act of 1875. Why is this important? Because the Civil Rights Act in 1875 that they struck down, these were acts, these were laws, and these were policies that were passed by these Black elected officials, right? And then they come in and they kill folks and they create these reformist governments. And then we get Jim Crow, really, for the next 100 years. So you get to the Civil Rights Movement. So that's the first clapback. Then there's the Civil Rights Movement. And, you know, I'm not going to go into all that. We all know that history. But what you need to know is at the end of that, there was a person named Lee Atwater who devised something called the Southern Strategy, right? And this strategy was a clapback from all the activity that happened to expand voting rights and civil rights. And then the clapback came at the Reagan administration, where there was like a pushback against those gains that had happened. So that's the second clapback. Then there was a Barack Obama. There was like a Black man got elected for president. And when he got elected, there was a whole thing created called the Tea Party. We all know this story. We lived this story. But think about what the Tea Party starts in on with Barack Obama. Where's your birth certificate? Are you a citizen? That's a 14th Amendment challenge around where he was born. That's a citizenship challenge, right? And then they move on to create like this kind of flank inside of that party, and it pulls that party into where we are currently at. Is this really the third kind of clapback moment as far as my organization has been framing this moment? And I want to just contextualize this here because we are at a point where we kind of got a radicalized Supreme Court, right? There is a radicalized Supreme Court. They're doing all kind of weird stuff. And then we have this other movement that is rising in our society, and we find ourselves at the crux of a presidential election. And so I just wanted to bring us into this context before I move on to talk to, like, really let the other panelists kind of lean into this conversation. I just wanted to put that contextual frame around it. But then I want to ask, because I know there's a lot of misinformation around Black males and Black men and voting and how we participate, et cetera. But we should start at the part where, one, what are the, like, as far as you know, Mr. Henderson or Brother Robinson, with either one of you could take this starting, but like, what are some of the fallacies about Black males and inside of the electorate? What are some of the fallacies that we hear about ourselves reflected back to us about our participation in elections?
So, Mr. Cooper, let me jump in. I appreciate the question, and thank you for the historic context that you laid out to start this panel. Before I address the question, let me mention a couple of things. First of all, I'm honored to be here, and I want to thank the Sisters of Delta Sigma Theta, both for sponsoring this panel and for inviting me to join. I do so in the name of Dr. Dorothy Irene Height, one of the presidents of Delta Sigma Theta, who served as the chair of my board for 16 years, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And so I am honored to do this panel or participate in her name. And then secondly, I want to honor my wife, my beloved wife of over 50 years, who is a Delta and pledged Alpha Chapter in 1970. So I'm honored to be here in her name as well. Secondly, I want to acknowledge Delta for hosting this particular panel of Black Men Speak. Black men speak about the issue of Black men in the electorate, and that is perhaps a first, certainly a first by one of the Divine Nine organizations, sororities, and I'm honored to participate. This discussion is important, and it occurs at an especially important time. Mr. Cooper talked about this as a clapback moment, and indeed it is. But it is also the perhaps most critically important election, certainly in our lifetime. And while that may be a bit of a cliche, because often we assert that with every election, but I think with this election, with so much being on the line, with democracy being on the line, with the future of our country in the most basic way being on the line, this is arguably the most important conversation and election we have had. One last preliminary, and that is the discussion of Black men in the electorate is long overdue. There have been many misimpressions about the role of Black men in the electorate, and over the past week in particular, a number of assertions have been made or implied about how Black men will engage in this election, particularly with the nomination of Vice President Kamala Harris, standing on the threshold of history in the most important way imaginable, and how Black men will relate to that. Let me say that while I understand the desire to motivate engagement on the part of Black voters, both men and women, the criticisms that have been leveled at Black men have been misplaced. Let us be honest that the overwhelming majority of both Black men and women will likely vote for the Democratic nominee for a host of reasons, but obviously electing a Black woman as president of the United States looms large. The fact that her opponent, a former president, who established his introduction to the public sphere by engaging in rampant housing discrimination with his father, being sued by the Department of Justice, and then subsequently seeking to railroad 5 innocent Black men of color, into the death chamber because he felt that they had somehow violated the law, even though it had been proven to the contrary, that they had not. And as Maya Angelou has pointed out, when someone tells you who they are, believe them the first time. So it is in this context that we have this conversation. So let me unpack your question, Mr. Cooper, very briefly, and then turn it over to Mr. Robinson. The Black vote, both men and women, will play an historic role in this election and the outcome. Black voters constitute a third of the electorate in Georgia, one of the crucial swing states. And our votes are concentrated in about 8 states, many in the South. but our ability, when fully mobilized, to sway the election in key states, states like North Carolina, like Virginia, and others, are critical. Texas is one of the states that could be impacted. So that in and of itself is critical. The assumption that Black men are somehow less enamored with Kamala Harris creates an impression that somehow there is a sense of betrayal, denial, that Black men don't feel the loyalty that would be expected to a Black woman. And I want to dispel that notion. There is nothing to suggest that that in and of itself holds the case. Certainly, there are individuals of all races who harbor views of misogyny directed toward women. That is not unique. On the other hand, there is a recognition that for the reasons that I've stated, putting Kamala Harris in the White House, and I understand this is a nonpartisan event, so I want to be careful about how I characterize my participation. My own views are clear. I believe that on the merits, Vice President Harris deserves our support. But having said that, I think individuals have to come to their own judgment. And there is certainly reasons for Black men and Black women to question at some point the depth of commitment of some of the democratic ideals in the past to positions that we think are important to our future. And to ask a nominee to speak to those issues in a way that is responsive, it seems to me, is well within the realm of what a voter should expect of any candidate. Now, one last point. The vice president has announced a 5-point agenda directed toward African American men, and it's a very important agenda. It includes loans for business development. It includes a focus on Black health. There is a recognition that the criminal justice system, based on the illegality of cannabis, has had a direct and negative impact on Black entrepreneurship and on the number of people in prison. And as a result, there are many deleterious effects on the right to vote that result from that. That initiative is well taken, and we should unpack it in the course of our conversation. Having said that, however, there is also more that is needed. And I think we should recognize that there is great value in what has already been laid out by the vice president, that the focus on Black male participation in the electorate is important. We should recognize that for certain. But there is also a recognition that Black men bring much to the table. And in conjunction with Black women, we are likely to have a significant impact on the outcome of this election, and one that will reflect well on us as a community and will serve our interests long term. So I'll stop there, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. That was a lot. We appreciate it. I want to call you in, Mr. Robinson. Come on in and kind of opine on that question.
Yeah, I think it's an extremely smart way for you to set the conversation or the context for this conversation in the history of the franchise and the Black amendments, right? And 13, 14, the 15, the 13th not doing completely what it was supposed to and freeing us, the 14th protecting us supposedly and giving us right to be citizens, and the 15th showing us that we were not protected. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the history of the Black vote, especially as it pertains to the Black man in the context of this conversation, you have in the 15th Amendment all of the flaws that became the grounds and tactics that will be used for voter suppression. So that makes Black men the first guinea pigs of voter suppression in this country, through poll tax, through literacy tests, and through threat of death with the creation of the Klan. So what you talked about in his first years of the 15th Amendment, you go from 90% participation rate to around 20%, which was where it was stagnant all the way through the 1910s through the 60s. 20% of Black men had the right to vote, did not vote because of poll tax, literacy tax, or the threat of death from mobs, right? Consider that. No one living in that time would say that Black men were not participating in elections in 1910 because they were apathetic, they didn't care about Black women, or they didn't care about our communities. They would have said, no, it's because of the real threat of death. It is because of poll tax and literacy tests. I will posit to everyone on this call, the YouTube brothers and plus everybody listening, that while poll tax and literacy tests are illegal, we still suffer from those very real things right now. Through the underemployment of Black men in 2024, through the unemployment of Black men in 2024, we still suffer from the poll tax, right? The underfunding of public educations in 2024, the banning of books, the refusal to have Black boys be seen as kids, and then them being over suspended and over expelled, still gives us literacy tests right now. Then you see that we are at 22% of Black men, only 22% of Black men have college degrees in this country. We know that education and the resources that come along with education, better paying jobs, also result to a more likelihood of voting. So then there is still the literacy test effect on Black men. And when we still have political actors that are killing Black men for no other reason than they are Black men in the form of police uniforms and police officers, then we still see the threat of death for being Black man in America. And for those reasons, we always reject this idea that there's a pathology in Black men that makes us apolitical or apathetic. I would charge that we should be doing some serious studies around epigenetic trauma and what it means for Black men, like our Jewish brothers and sisters who suffer from things that they didn't go through, but their ancestors who survived the Holocaust did. And if it's true that the Holocaust created trauma, PTSD in our Jewish brothers and sisters, then what did 140 years, talking about the time from the passage of the 15th Amendment to now, what has it done to the psyche of Black men, and how does that affect turnout? Until we get serious about those issues, we will never understand what's truly keeping brothers from the poll in a way that creates a 10 to 12% deficit between our sisters. Now, as it pertains to this idea that Black men, and Henderson did a wonderful job on this, Black men will not support Black women, there's no historical grounding for this, because even to the first Black woman to try to run for office, no one supported Shirley Chisholm like Black men other than Black women. And that has been the case for every woman, every Black woman that put a name on a ballot in this country since Shirley Chisholm to this point. So we are talking about a historical thing that never existed. This conversation does nothing except for create division in our community in a way that is not healthy to increase in those who don't participate. Now let's talk about some real facts. In this country, there are 9.6 million Black men registered to vote. 9.6 million. Of that 9.6 million, 59% have not voted in the last 4 federal election, or only one of them. That is a critique of the tacticians and those people who seek to reach us because they show up in election cycles and not when there's no election, right? So they create this distrust in candidates and also in the electoral process itself. You coming to see me for my vote, never when we're worrying about what's keeping my backs against the razor edge of the wall. And in doing so, we have to name the true opponent of the vice president, Kamala Harris. It is not Donald Trump. Black men have shown a disdain for Donald Trump. Ever since he's come on the political scene, we've watched Black men become more progressive. What I mean by that, in 2016, Donald Trump got more Black men to vote for him than he did in 2020. 2020, less Black men voted for Donald Trump than they did in 2016. 2022, even more Black men became more progressive, and we did something as a Black community that we never done. We outperformed white people. Black people did. And in 2023, Black men wanted to remind the world how progressive we were becoming by outperforming everybody, including Black women, on women's right to choose in Ohio, right? Black men voted at 88% for women's right to choose, and Black women were the closest demographic at 80%. And then we outperformed on women's right to choose more than we did for legalization of marijuana. So this is a testament to Black men showing up, but never being acknowledged for that effort, right? We get called all types of ridiculous names, and the white people of Black people, someone said, which blew my mind, right? They said that we would never support a Black woman being in leadership, and I reminded people that it was 2018 where Stacey Abrams and Andrew Gillum were running to be governors of southern states, and 12% of Black men did vote against Stacey Abrams, but more than 20% of Black women, 13% who were registered Democrats, voted against Andrew Gillum, and no one dared say that Black women don't support Black men. So we should ground ourselves in those facts, in those realities, and also question the narrative of where does America, politicians, media, pundits, and everybody get off question the loyalty of the black community when we vote as a block like nobody else in this country. There are no men and women that vote together like black men and black women. No one even close. And so to say that we need 100% of black people doing something is to say that we don't have the decency to make decisions for ourselves. Some of us get the right to be selfish. Majority of us vote for community, and we see that election cycle, regardless of where we are, geography, where we are economically. Black people still vote as a monolith. And that is a testament to who we are and how we see ourselves and the role we play in community. No one can match that. No one will match that. In this election cycle, as the organization with the more voting data on black men who don't show up. We're talking about the brothers without college degrees, brothers who are living paycheck to paycheck or no paycheck, the 59% that have not voted in the last 4 federal elections. We have more data on those brothers, and I know for a fact they're not becoming more in tune to Donald Trump. The problem is the real opponent is antipathy, the hate for how transactional politics are. And I'll stop there because I'm talking a lot and I see you want to get back in the conversation. But no, I'm not, my hair's not on fire because brothers might not vote for their sister, because we're damn well going to do that.
Yeah. I mean, you can see, one, I just want to appreciate you both for kind of like dispelling some of these myths. I mean, these are things we hear over and over and over again. And it feels like, I mean, we talk about this, Mondale, honestly. We're like, here they go. They're about to set us up to be the fall for this election again, right? Like we start talking about black men, here we go. But there is a thing that is happening also right now that we should probably lean into, which is like, you said it earlier, who's coming up with these stories, right? Like, you know, I had this professor who used to say, how do you say? He say, once the oppressor can get the oppressed to see themselves the way that the oppressor does, then the oppressor can control them with no physical act of violence or aggression, right? Meaning, like, if our oppressors can get the society to see black men the way that they see black men, which happens in a lot of different ways, then we could tell these stories and people just automatically kind of like absorb them and let them be real. But I do want to ask a question to you two. Like, one is where do you think these stories come from, or like who's driving this agenda? And then kind of tied with that, because you're here, Mr. Henderson, and I ain't trying to put nobody out or nothing, but there is a thing happening. You know, we out here trying to raise money for very good events that engage black men, and we are struggling. Like, as a unit, I've talked to several different brothers who run a good program. Like, they run a good like, it's engaging, but they're struggling to get resources right now at a time when they're saying all these resources are available. I want to just zoom out a little bit, but like, where do y'all think these stories come from? And kind of what do you think is happening right now? Because I wake up daily thinking to myself, like, are they trying to lose?
Well, Brother Cooper, let me go back to your original framing of this panel. Your historic knowledge was critically important in setting an appropriate stage for this discussion. Black men have historically been the most disfavored group in American society. We have been the most demonized, the most mischaracterized, and the most undervalued in terms of our contribution to the overall society. So there is an historical context to this. Secondly, there is an effort on the part of many who play peripheral but important roles in the outcome of this election that see an advantage in alienating Black men from Black women and alienating Black men from the majority of support that we have in our community. There is a value to them in doing this. So there is much manipulation, much misinformation. In the last election, both in 2016 and in 2020, there was evidence of foreign involvement with the use of social media as a way of distorting the legitimacy of how this played out, it played a very significant role. And so there is that history.
Yeah.
Then my other element is the fact that a substantial percentage of Black men are disenfranchised because of felony convictions
And say
in
that.
critical states.
Yeah.
And that is a reality that often is ignored, but has a real impact in keeping down the numbers of participants in key states. In Florida, there are 900,000
Mhm.
disenfranchised citizens who have served their time
Yeah.
and who should otherwise be eligible to vote. Even with the passage of a referendum, the governor was able to manipulate the outcome by insisting that persons who would be admitted into the realm of society and allowed to vote must pay past indebtedness and fines in order to qualify. So, I mean, there are a host of impediments, both real and some not visible, that play an important role in shaping this narrative. The difficulty, though, is compounded when some in our own community pick up this misinformation, these mischaracterizations, and reinforce them in ways that are not especially helpful. So while I certainly understand the motivation behind President Obama's contact last week and his comments with Black men, I respectfully disagree with that approach. It's
Indeed.
not especially helpful.
Yeah.
And unpacking what is constituted as self-interest so that we understand what the interests are of Black men and why they may be looking askance at some of these candidates is important.
Yeah.
Vice President Harris understands that. And I thought her interview today with Charlemagne the God was a very important a contribution to a better understanding within the African American community of what her interests are and what she brings to the table.
Yeah, and listen, I definitely want to stay on that, the who, right? This idea of where's this narrative come from? I mean, if in this context, in this moment, it comes, I mean, it's not a new narrative. They said that Bush was going to get 25% of the Black men vote. It didn't come true. We know pollsters got to sell polls. And, you know, when you have people like Donald Trump, who's willing to say anything in February of 2020, if you go back, Trump said, I'm going to get 20% of the Black men vote. Not grounded in anything, just Trump being Trump. And then all of a sudden we started seeing polls that show up and media pundits starting to confirm that Trump's going to get 20% of the Black men vote. Even though folks with data, those of us who had intimate relationship with the brothers who do not find themselves at the top of the food chain or the middle class, so the majority of Black men, those of us with intimate relationship with those brothers, knew this was not true. We saw that Trump was going to get less votes, and that's what happened in November of 2020, right? He got less of the Black men vote. So when you ask where it come from, it's Trump. Alternative facts in the way that he will and continue to do it, regardless if the data shows that he's lying. It doesn't matter. He's going to continue to go with it. Our problem is that right now we find a media that is more concerned with clicks and likes and shares than they are with stories. Real journalism is on the way out because of folk like this. And I think that is also an absent, you see an absence of Black journalism, and you see this narrative getting legs and like it shouldn't. I also I add that, you know, there's something serious about the lack of intimate relationship with brothers who don't see themselves represented in those of us that are college educated with terminal degrees that are making those of us that eat by and got lucky in America's trick that does not allow Black men to be successful. Because if you look at America, it's not designed for successful Black men. That is not the nature of America in its current form. So I think Henderson said something about demonizing and the undervaluing of Black men. Those things tie into this lack of intimate relationship. And because those things are the couple that are married, we have in America this long suffering of Black men that people are comfortable with. And that long suffering leads to these misnomers that people set their hair on fire and start demonizing Black men, even when history has never shown you something, right? History has never shown us sister parties shift their policies. And you name Lee Atwater, Ronald Reagan, and Donald Trump too is using a Southern strategy. The MAGA movement is, please believe me, the continuation of the Southern strategy, where you demonize, you scare white people based on their Black neighbors, and they'll vote for you. This is what Lee Atwater did. it said it plain, right? Richard Nixon said, let's roll with it, and Trump is doing it right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people should understand that, there's no fixing that. People that want that, people that support that, you need to leave them alone. Our job, as Henderson so eloquently said, is to win an election. Anything like Barack Obama's comment last week that distorts us or costs us votes is not a part of it, or should not be a part of our strategy, regardless of who said it. Now, our job is to not focus on it too long. You put your stake in the ground for history's sake, and you move on. And I think the moving on is, how do we continue to expand the electorate? What are we going to do to make sure that brothers that don't see themselves in the political process are still understanding that that vote is powerful? And if it wasn't, they wouldn't be doing things like using bots and paying people that look like you to distort the value of your vote.
That's really a good segue into, and I see some folks are in the chat. I just want to just lift what Janine said in the chat. It was basically just adding that, when voters, or when brothers, or people in general, particularly Black people in Black communities, when they miss an election or two elections, then the secretaries of state start removing them from the rolls, right? Like, for instance, in Ohio, there was a time right before actually, maybe it was 2020, the Secretary of State and Attorney General got together and came up with a way to clean the list, right? And the way they cleaned it was people who voted in 2008 but didn't vote in 2010, voted in 2012 but didn't vote in 2014. They like cleaned those people off the list. Clearly, that's like, those are Obama year, right? Like, those are people who were surge voters for Obama, and then like didn't pay attention to the local, probably didn't vote in the midterm, voted again, right? Like, so this is also happening in the background. But what you said, the last thing you said made me start thinking about, I know you do a lot of polling. I know you do surveys. I know you're talking to people. I know you're having roundtables. I know you're doing focus groups. You've been doing this for years. I've known you for years, and you've been doing this for longer than I've known you. So I do want to just speak for a minute on, when you talk about increasing the electorate, when you talk about engaging Black men, what are the things that Black men are talking about? What do they really care about, right? Like, what are those conversations? What are the things we probably should be talking about if we want to appeal to Black men?
So this is going to sound cynical, but it's also true. In this moment, if you don't have a relationship with the Black men you're trying to engage, if this is your first conversation with them, it doesn't matter what you say to them. You're not a trusted messenger, so you're not going to move them. They're not animated simply by issues. You have to be someone that is in their trusted message circle. And I think this is the problem. This is why I said the vice president's opponent is not Donald Trump. It is the system, because the way the system is baked, Black men is not built to trust it. So she's fighting that. That's her uphill battle, to convince brothers to get off the couch and vote for her. That work comes in the form of trusted messenger. This is why when you talked about resources and priorities, it becomes a problem that organizations like yours and like all these other brothers we know, Freedom Block and all of these guys doing amazing work to reach brothers who are missed, because they're not members of Divine Nine, they're not college graduates, they're not, you know what I mean? The regular brothers that are working, struggling, they're being missed because their trusted messengers can't hire those organizers full time, because the money is being sent to personalities, to candidates, to auxiliaries, and not these long-term organizations that have relationships that are talking to these brothers when there's no election on the ballot. And unfortunately, the fact that you can go to a Black man right now and tell them, yo, I got something that's gonna address the fact that you are making minimum wage and you've been there for a long time. It's called a basic income. It doesn't matter that you say that right now. It doesn't sound true, right? And that's the number one issue. It doesn't matter that you want to talk to them about bringing trades back to school, because brothers see they can take themselves out of the microaggressions they suffer in the workplace, right? When they own their own trade. Doesn't matter if you say that if you never had a conversation with them, it doesn't sound true, right? Doesn't matter that you can want to go talk to them about qualified immunity, even though that's not language brothers use. They still care about cops not being prosecuted. You can have those conversations. They're going to look at you and say it's cap. And if you know what the cap is, you already part of the problem.
If you don't know what cap is, then you ain't in the conversation.
You're part of the problem already. So it's beyond being right on messaging. And I hear people call me right now, like, what do we need to say to Black men right now? If you've not said anything to them already and they're not listening to you, don't matter what you say.
Yeah.
It's just you're part of
Well,
the movement.
let me pick up on that because Brother Robinson, you're absolutely right. And it brings me to a point that what we do between elections is as important as what we do around elections in terms of informing the electorate about what steps we need to take and how their involvement benefits them directly. Look, voting is the language of democracy.
Mm.
If you don't vote, you don't count. And you don't count in practical ways that affect your everyday life. But if we are not framing issues in ways that touch Black men, Black women, where we live, then we're not going to be effective in communicating the importance of getting their vote in the electorate that we serve. So I frame this debate essentially as closing the racial wealth gap. The racial wealth gap is the new challenge to America's basic civil rights gains. We have made significant strides since the 1960s, culminating in the passage of significant legislation. But there is still a systemic gap in wealth acquisition, and it is based on not active discrimination by people who hold positions of power, although in some instances that occurs, but there is a systemic impediment that we have to overcome that addresses this issue of the racial wealth gap that exists in society. So, for example, we have the lowest unemployment rate today overall that we've seen in years. It's 4.1%. For Black unemployment, it's 5.7%. It has never been equal in my lifetime or prior to my birth. And, the truth is, I'm an advanced baby boomer. You brothers are younger. But the truth is, there has never been a parity between Blacks and whites with respect to unemployment. The racial wealth gap continues to serve as an impediment in allowing us to engage in the opportunity that Kamala Harris has talked about in terms of her agenda and what we believe that every American should be entitled to receive. So I'm so pleased that the initiative that the Vice President outlined today, the economic elements that speak to the issue of economic inequality are important, but we need to do more. And we need to talk about how we're going to do it in practical terms. For example, we talked about the disenfranchised Black voter who, because of a felony conviction, is unable to engage in voting in 11 states.
Mm.
The hundreds of thousands, the millions of voters, many who are African American and Latino, who are not able to speak to the issues that affect their daily lives, that's a huge problem. And there needs to be a state by state campaign that is committed to ending that disenfranchisement of voters. If you have served your time, your debt to society, you should be allowed to vote. And that should be a principle that is applied in every election going forward. We're going to need to make sure that we address issues of systemic inequality in the economy. So I commend the Vice President for her creation of a loan fund to help advance Black entrepreneurs. And in the cannabis manufacturing and distribution space, making sure that opportunities exist to allow Black business development to occur. Those kinds of steps are taken. There are also, however, and we should not lose sight of this, issues that are not necessarily directed specifically toward Black people that have a benefit disproportionate and significant to our community. The child tax credit, for example, which helped end poverty for children, large numbers of whom were Black and brown, is a significant advancement that we should push forward in society. And my last point would be that I would hope the Vice President would ask President Biden to announce a presidential commission to study reparations for African Americans, and to do that after the election, but before the inauguration, so that the commission is established and he doesn't put that burden on Kamala Harris, even though if he does not do it, she should move forward to advance it. But you know as well as I do, there's going to be significant criticism with the creation of a presidential commission to examine the efficacy of reparations for African Americans, but that is an essential commitment that must be made and must be carried out by the executive branch.
Thank you.
Let me-
Thank you. I want to
me-
pause you real quick because there's some questions coming up. There's
Okay.
questions in the chat.
Okay.
I need. Well, one of them. I'm sorry to cut you off, but there's one thing that folks want to know to move forward, which is, what did Barack Obama say last week, Mr. Anderson? This is coming up in the chat. You said, but I want to give y'all some space just to let people know exactly what was said.
Well, the president headed a rally for the vice president, and it was wonderful. And as usual, he brought his characteristic eloquence and his ability to relate to his audience to the table in support of the vice president, which was wonderful, and I'm glad he did it. There was a portion of his speech, however, that was focused at a message to Black men. And he spoke to us in a way that seemed to be chiding us to move beyond our narrow views of the importance of voting for the vice president and to commit ourselves to doing so. Now, he did it in a loving way, and I want to acknowledge that. But at the same time, the message was, in fact, one that is likely not to resonate with the audience that it was intended to affect. And if anything, reinforces that view that, as Brother Robinson indicated, is not based on fact. No evidence supports this position per se, that Black men are somehow not going to turn out for Vice President Harris. There's no indication of that just yet. I sort of, took a bit of his comments in perhaps the way that he spoke to the graduates at Morehouse.
Exactly.
A couple of years ago. It carried with it that same bit of criticism that is perhaps misguided. So my own sense is this: we should be fact-based and principled in our assessment. We should be grounded in empirical data where that data exists. And if anything, we should be given the benefit of the doubt in terms of how we will make judgments that speak to our ability to support the appropriate candidate. And I think in that regard, Kamala Harris will get the overall benefit of both Black men and Black women. The comparison between the level of turnout that is expected for Kamala Harris versus what Barack Obama got in 2008, look, that's misguided. Let us look to opportunities to turn that around. And then one last point. We haven't talked anything about gerrymandering. We haven't talked about voter suppression. We haven't talked about the difficulty that exists. As Brother Robinson said, there is a systemic barrier that we have to overcome, which is part of the opposition that Kamala Harris faces. We haven't talked about any of that. And that voter suppression plays a significant role in keeping Black votes down. And that is its purpose. But we should recognize that, and we should fight to overcome that to ensure that we maximize every vote that's available to us.
Thank you.
And I think
go ahead, jump back in. I know you.
Yeah. So I want to first. I don't need to say anything about what the president said because Henderson just wrapped it up perfectly. I would also argue that the one thing I think that the one little thing that was the chiding that evoked in me the same feeling I felt with the Morehouse and the Beergate thing with Skip was when he said something that was not grounded in truth, right? Like he said, I don't see the excitement around Kamala that was for him or the turnout. Well, first of all, it's not been an opportunity for turnout. And in 2012, people might forget that over half of the Black men that were registered to vote did not vote at all. So this false narrative of who you are and where you find yourself electorally in Black history, he might have been just centering his opinion rather than the victory of this election. And I think we should leave that there because as you said, I feel like he was being in a loving atmosphere speaking, but it was the improper time to center your opinion. But back to this one comment, I want to go even further than what Mr. Henderson said, and that Mr. Henderson is that The idea that people have to serve their time to vote is reserved strictly for Black people. This goes right, because if you go to the whitest states, Vermont, you never lose your right to vote. When you're in prison, you still can vote, right? This is a state that has less than 0.1% that is Black, and they can vote all the time. So the senator in questioning should they have a loss of rights to, when you're in prison in Vermont, said the vote is so important that a citizen should never be stripped of it. So that is how they see it in white states, but not in states where a majority or a large portion of the population is Black. So I wanted to say that. But I also wanted to go back to something that people aren't talking about. That this is the other science that we use at Black Men Voter Project. MIT came up with this thing, talk about habit loops. And it said that to form habits, we are wired. There are neurons in our brains, actually neurons, that people are doing cost and benefit analysis for habits. If forming a habit, creating a new habit requires those benefits, the way that we campaign definitely stops or creates more Black men to vote, right? We are doing a cost, and if we're doing a cost analysis, Black men don't see a cost if they're living with their backs against the wall, if they're insecure in housing, income, healthcare. It is impossible to see them voting in a way that is increasing the habit that they will do it twice or 3 times, because this damn election system don't feed us. In real life, Black men have the shortest lives of anybody, not just in this country, but out of 105 out of 190 countries in the world. You have to go to places like South Sudan or Afghanistan to find people with shorter lives than Black men in America, the so-called richest nation in the world. We are only 22% college educated. We are over-suspended, over-expelled, over-policed, over-sentenced, overcharged. And I could just keep going on over and over, and all of those overs are negative markers. So to say that there's no reason Black men wouldn't be at the poll when they're living with their backs against the wall, they don't have their basic needs met, but we continue to present voting as if it's something you do when you're self-actualize, is to tell us to stop being human.
Got it. Appreciate y'all. We're gonna turn towards to receive some of the questions that are coming in from the chat. One thing I do want to, someone is in the chat saying like we should correct the record that it wasn't a speech that Obama gave, but it was a comment made in the campaign office.
I think, but what happens though is that nuance that doesn't need to be connected. I'm gonna tell you why.
Yeah.
Because even in that space, he was giving a speech.
Yeah. I mean, he's still who he is.
Yeah.
But he's still who he is. Period.
Right.
I just want to make sure that person felt like their thing was lifted in the space. I want to take a couple questions here. There's some up here. Sure, I'm trying to track them, but they're real quick. Cap means like BS.
You're
like,
lying. Yeah.
You're lying. Yeah, that's what it means. So when somebody's like, oh, that's cap, they're basically saying they're lying. That's not real. And then I'm trying to catch some of these if you want to bump them to me.
If you like, I can read a couple.
Yes, please. I'm trying to track them.
So going back to the question of, how to communicate to Black men in this election and move them toward voting. I think there was a discussion about needing to be a trusted messenger. So the question is, if you don't currently have any kind of relationship, then are you saying that it's pointless to try to dialogue with them in this election?
Yeah, I would say if you have something you want to say, articulate that you think is strategic in this moment to Black men, and you have no relationship with them, call somebody that is a trusted messenger, and let them tell them. Because this is why we at Black Men Voter Project do not allow volunteers to come canvas for us. We spend so much time training our organizers, getting them prepared to have and listen to Black men in the proper way, that we don't want to jeopardize this like habit forming relationship that we're trying to build with them. So it is extremely important. That sounds counter, but yeah, I think there's other ways. If you want to go talk to super voters or likely voters, I think that's fine. But you need to make sure that if you're talking to brothers who are on the fence, you're being very delicate with the issue.
Yeah. Can I add a piece to this? I know we're moving and want to get to the closing comments, but there is something to be said about how Black men talk and how people want Black men to talk, right? Like there's a story I'll tell. I'm gonna tell it really quick. So my mom passed in 2009. I ended up staying at my house in Akron. I would just be there all day. My cousin, who was like the weed man, would come by my house because he ain't have to work. And when he would sit down and talk to me, we would watching TV, and I'll be talking about propaganda and how this is all propaganda. Remember, I'm Pan-African Studies anthropology major. Like I'm reading. I'm like, oh, this propaganda. He's like, yeah, propaganda. And it's like literally 3 or 4 weeks later when I say something, and I'm like, damn, you know what propaganda mean? And he say, no, I don't. I said, well, why when I was saying this to you, were you just going along with it? And he said,
that's true.
He said, no, he said, one is that, right? He's just rolling with me. But two, he said, I didn't want you to think I was stupid. I didn't want you to think I didn't know. And so it makes me think about, we are talking past people, right? And like, if you're not willing to take the time, the thing I think Mandela is really saying is, if you're not willing to sit down and take the time to actually get to talk to if you just want to go talk at some black man because it makes you feel good, that's not going to be effective. But if you're willing to sit down and actually have a dialogue and hear some things that you don't understand and maybe don't like, to have a deeper understanding of who the human is, then you should go. You know, like there's something to do there. But if it's just, that's why the thing with Obama feels a certain way when it lands, because it's just like another person who's giving the black man a lecture without like acknowledging all these other things that we're speaking about on this call.
So let me just say one other thing about President Obama, because as I said, I love President Obama. And I think his impact on history and on this election has been nothing short of extraordinary. So my comments are made in a loving recognition that of all people to speak to these issues, he is certainly one of the most well-positioned. He should get credit for raising this issue and stimulating the kind of conversation we have had this evening. And that is taking place in lots of communities around the country. There was a story in the Washington Post today focused on Michigan and Black men in Michigan looking at these issues. The president's comments have triggered this kind of dialogue that we are having, so it has played a constructive role. But having said that, if we want to reach the people that the president was talking to, and that is people that he felt might sit the election out, decided not to show up, perhaps even flirted with voting for someone who arguably is diametrically opposed to their interests, if we want to reach those people, we've got to have, as Brother Robinson said, trusted messengers. But we also have to put this in a context that allows us to unpack what was said in a way that hopefully advances the broader conversation. So to the sister who raised this issue about making sure the record is correct, your point is well taken, but we also want to recognize that what we have talked about tonight is the second level of conversation that rarely takes place in the kind of freewheeling criticism that is often directed or misdirected toward Black men and their participation in the electorate.
All right. I want to point our attention. I'm not sure about time though, Cheryl. You let me know. Like we count and we clocking. Close. Bet. All right. So there's two questions.
Wrap up. That includes your wrap up point.
I got you. So there are two questions. I'm gonna.
If people want to stay too, brother, let me say this. Like, look, I got some time tonight. You just make me co-host, and I'll stick around with that. Let's keep going. I would much rather people leave understanding Black men.
I hear it.
And go back on Twitter and cost us 3 or 4 of them votes, and that's enough to cost us the election.
It's gonna come down to like 15. You already know. But there are two questions. Maybe we can get through this because I think we might can combine these two questions. If we can answer them quickly. One, you can see them there. One is like, as older men, older Black men, how do you teach young Black men the truth behind the history of the Republican Party, et cetera? And then the other one is, what organizations are actually out here getting folks involved, getting Black men involved and getting them to move towards like political leadership? I already know. Yeah. Go ahead. But remember that part we got.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So real quick, I would say there's organizations like Black Men Institute in Georgia, BMI, John Taylor. There's Freedom Block. There's The Voter Project, of course, which is my organization, with the first national one. There's BMB, Black Men Bill. So there are orgs out here doing it already. I would also say, though, to the first question is, I think this is part of the problem. Like the way we frame questions, like how are we going to teach Black men about their history? I think we don't give brothers enough credit, and we assume that they don't understand who they are up against. I tell people all the time, to believe that Black men don't know who Donald Trump is, to say that we live in boxes under the ground. Black men are smarter than the world give them credit. I think what we forget is there are more Black men on the planet now than there ever been, because the two generations, millennials and Zers, are so large and so diverse. We talked about a generation earlier, the baby boomers, which basically controlled our politics up into this last election. And that generation was 70-some% white. We have generations that are 45, 46% something other than white now. So Black people represent more than the population they ever had. So we don't need to teach them anything. We need to watch them, because what I'm saying is we have millennials and Zers outperforming any generations ever, right? Zers in their first midterm, the one that just passed, outperformed. They voted higher than any generation, including boomers, including like the other generations ever. No young generation ever did that in their first midterm. And we're not talking about how active these people are. They're also they're more likely to volunteer. They give more money. So we automatically assume, because they're always in their phone, that they're selfish creatures. These people are doing more than we give them credit for.
So, and I agree completely with that, Mr. Robinson. I do think, though, there is one thing we haven't said tonight that it seems to me is a significant factor in helping to frame this election. And that is, look, whiteness is on the ballot. Ladies and gentlemen, whiteness is on the ballot. Part of Donald Trump's appeal to the MAGA base is based on their anxiety about losing their stature as the majority white population in the United States. Trump is playing to those fears and anxieties. His demonization of immigrants of color, Haitians, and the border crisis, which, by the way, he helped perpetuate by blocking legislation to address it, is based on the anxiety that white people feel about losing their preferred status in American life. The demographic imperative that we often discuss about America changing its character in the next 30 years is something that haunts many of the MAGA base, and that is at play. So, while there are many issues that are obvious that are affecting the outcome, this is one issue that is sub rosa, just beneath the surface, but plays an important part. Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, is an excellent characterization of what we're up against. And so it really is important to take into account how these factors of race, not necessarily explicit, but certainly important in framing this issue, are on the table as well.
Man, my mind. Whiteness is on the ballot.
Yeah. I'm just telling you right now, right here, I'm jacking that. You're gonna hear me say that several times. Oh, jacking means I'm gonna steal it. I
love that.
Okay.
If we talk about things we're going to steal, I'm stealing voting is the language of democracy.
Yes.
Wade Henderson. But I'll give you, I'm gonna make sure I quote.
No problem, Ms.
I'm gonna do my best to give you. I already took the other what do you say, progressive divide by multiply by division. Now I'm running that one for 10 years. I try to give you credit for it. I know we're getting close to the end, Mondale. I know you're like, and for folks who know this brother, he is serious. Like, if you want to stay here, he will stay here until you get it and leave. But you should probably tap in at where should they tap in, Mondale? I mean,
no, if you really want to have a conversation with me, and out of respect of the host, their time and space, and also I got a wife in there who's waiting on me, probably angry about her food. You should follow me on all platforms. I am Mondale Robinson, or Black Male Voter Project at blackmalevoterproject.org. And of course, black male is MALE, like the gender, not like the crime.
And I would be remiss, colleagues, if I didn't mention the NAACP and the role that the NAACP is playing in getting out the vote, engaging in this direct action. Derek Johnson, the president of the NAACP, is doing an outstanding job, and his team is really deeply engaged in this effort. I'd encourage you to look at their work. I also recommend my previous organization, now headed by Maya Wiley, who is a Delta, by the way, ladies.
Right.
Maya Wiley is a Delta, and she heads the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and is actively engaged in voter engagement as well. So I just want to mention those two organizations to consider.
No doubt.
So
Can we say, because sometimes we just write NAACP off as a legacy organization and leave it at that.
Right.
Derek Johnson is doing God's work with taking
Yeah.
that organization and making it fit the 21st century. And I'd be
Yeah.
damned, that's got to be hard. So I applaud that. I applaud that, especially with the structure that was built to protect it, safeguard it from white people trying to destroy it back in the 60s. So I appreciate what their brother's doing. And he and I don't always see eye to eye, but it is a fool that will discount that man's work.
Yeah, he's doing great work. Doing great work. All right. I know we're at the end. Do we have another question?
Perhaps you can use this as part of the wrap up. So the question is, this conversation, how do we translate this conversation to action and votes?
You want me to? I can
Go
say
ahead,
I'm the moderator. Jeez. I think part of
Right ahead.
listen, you all have been saying stuff. I don't know if my face is showing it, but this has been a great conversation. I think the first thing is really to start building relationships with folks that you normally wouldn't talk to, right? Like, and honestly, really thinking about what organizations are actually doing that work as well. But I think for me, I run an organization called Popular Democracy, and our entire theory of change is that you have to be in the streets talking to folks who are directly impacted, and you have to do it outside of election. You have to do it all year round, right? Like, you can't just, what we normally do is we get up here to election, then we start trying to herd people into voting booths by throwing a bunch of trash on their porch. I mean, if you've been out here canvassing, there's a bunch of trash on people's porch. But what it really is going to take is for us to start building institutions, really thinking about how do we build long-standing institutions. The NAACP is one thing, but there's other local institutions, like you and your neighbors, your friends, your people, constantly staying in that rigor of being together, staying in conversation, even when it gets difficult. We have to have better things. This is why I use that quote all the time. We have to have better ways to disagree without turning into white supremacists. Absolutely. Because white supremacists, they ostracize them, and then they can eliminate them. And we do that ourselves because we're kind of stuck in Stockholm syndrome, and we don't have other ways to disagree besides actually othering someone. And the idea that we actually need to build a bigger we together, and the way that we do that is by staying in the conversation and actually listening to each other to come to a place where we can have alignment to move forward. Alignment and conformity are different things, but we need alignment with each other.
Mr. Robinson, you want to go ahead and I'll follow you.
Sure thing. So I think for me, I think the action to leave here is to not pretend that the work ends in 3 weeks. Stop thinking that we are done, or what we need to do now is just to do it for the 3 weeks. We need to be a lot. After the election is when the work really starts. How do you hold politicians accountable to give you what they just told you they were going to give you? That is the work that we should be busying ourselves with. Also, in doing so, as Cooper just said, we will stay in community because we'll be working to organize people around issues most important to them. And I say this all the time. If we want our politics to be cheaper, we should be around people more often. Waiting to the last second is like buying an iPhone in 2024. Investing in conversations all year long is like buying an Apple stock in the 80s. Yeah, you're gonna get a nice device if you purchase it in 2024, but it's not as nice as what will happen on return-wise if you have Apple stock from the 80s. So I think we need to start thinking about long-term stock. And that stock is investing in our people and beyond this transactional nature of election cycles, changing the donor class idea of when they support people and when they should be supporting organization will go a long way. And I think remember that your brothers and sisters are humans, and that's it.
That's right.
So to pick up on your last point, Mr. Robinson, let me say, as I tried to say earlier, what we do between elections is as important as what we do in preparation around the election. And that is certainly true here. Now, it is clearly important that we have got to maximize every vote available to us for this election. So even though you're right that trusted messengers are critically important, and we're going to try to do that, we are all, this is a full court press. We need everyone devoted to bringing people to the polls and participating. There can be, no people standing on the sidelines. If you stand on the sideline, if you are not voting, if you don't vote, that is in and of itself a vote for Donald Trump, to be perfectly frank with you. If you are not casting a ballot, if you sit this one out, you are voting for your opposition to your best interest. So we need to have every vote maximized. Now, after the election, we have to make certain that many of the problems that exist systemically in the electorate now are addressed. So the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, the Freedom to Vote Act are critically important. That may require the vice president to support eliminating the filibuster in the Senate, which makes that impossible to get. We need that bill, those bills, and we need to make certain we're committed to making that happen. Secondly, we have got to look at the conditions of the disenfranchised vote at the state level. It only is going to be resolved at the state level. There have to be ongoing programs to restore the vote to everyone, regardless of race, who cannot vote. That has to be a primary effort that we are committed to making happen. And then thirdly, looking at issues through the lens of how we eliminate the racial wealth gap, which can be defined very broadly and applied in a number of different instances. It is something that is very important to people who are outside of the system and who have their noses pressed against the glass. The unbanked, the people who are unable to take full advantage of the advanced technology that exists today. Getting people connected to the internet, basic access to technology. Those are elements that help build the process of eliminating the racial wealth gap. So we have to be broad in our effort, and we have to be willing to form new alliances. Delta Sigma Theta is a powerful organization and has done much over the years. But the Divine Nine, the other fraternities and sororities that are out there now need to be mobilized as well. They are mobilized, but they need to be connected and help driven to some of these issues that we've talked about here today. So forming new connections, coalition politics, establishing ways of advancing our political agenda, even in times of difficulty, have to be some of the goals we focus on in the aftermath of this election.
Thank you, brothers. This was amazing. I really do appreciate you both coming and really bringing your perspective. I know there's a lot of things in the chat that didn't get to be discussed. I mean, we didn't even get to Project 2025, but y'all should just go look that up. But I do appreciate both, Mondale, Mr. Henderson. Y'all are both brothers, and I know your work, Mr. Henderson. I know your work, Mondale, and I just appreciate you both for coming and sharing the way that you shared. And I'm supposed to turn this over to Kimberly Robinson. Any last words? Y'all good? Y'all good? Y'all good? We good? Ms. Robinson?
I think Mr. Henderson did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
You as well, Mr. Robinson. And Mr. Cooper, you've been outstanding as a moderator. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Leadership.
You still look like a tall version of me, dog. Stop playing.
No, you're a short version of me, bro.
Oh.
Well, so on behalf of Delta Sigma Theta, I just want to say to all of you, to Mr. Cooper, to Mr. Robinson, love that name, Mr. Robinson, and to Mr. Henderson, thank you all so much for being with us today. My job is to talk about what's next, and I think you all have teed that up amazingly. as we talk about what we're going to do over these next 20 days until the election and beyond the election, just as you all just said. To my soars of Delta Sigma Theta, you know that our theme for this election cycle has been fortitude on the front lines. And that frontline conversation is exactly where we are today. We know that these webinars are important. They've been part of the education that we have helped to provide to you, to our chapters, and to our communities. And we know chapters across the country have been holding these for your local communities. But we are at that point where we need everybody to be outside, as the young people say. We need you outside on that front line. We need your activism. We need your engagement. We need you in these election streets as we are making sure that we are fulfilling the call that we have from our international president and dating all the way back to our founders who marched for suffrage from the beginning. We want to make sure that every Delta is on the front lines, making sure that if you were in a state where people can still register to vote, like my state, where you can walk in during early voting and register on the spot, that you are getting people registered where that is still an option, that you are educating your communities about what is at stake on this ballot. I heard just now the mention that there were some questions about Project 2025, and I know I get the question sometimes from chapters, can we talk about it? It's a policy initiative, and we absolutely are here to talk about policy. Tonight, you heard a lot of conversation around two of our candidates in this presidential election. And while we know Delta Sigma Theta is a nonpartisan organization and we do not endorse and have not endorsed any particular candidate for office, it is still important that we understand the policy of those candidates. And you heard a lot of thoughts about the policies that are being put forward during this election cycle in today's presentation. So we want to make sure that we are, in fact, educating our communities. And absolutely, as you just heard from the brothers on the panel, that we are at that moment of needing to mobilize people to the polls. If you're like me, you saw the story today that said Georgia had historic early voting turnout today as they began early voting in that state. That is what we're talking about. It's taking the energy, the excitement, the thoughts, the feelings, the engagement that is happening across our communities and getting people to the polls. And so we want to make sure that every one of our chapters is helping to share that information, where to go vote, how to find your polling location, how to make sure that people know what's on their ballot. There's a lot of focus on the presidential election, but in many of our states, we have local elections. In my state, we're voting for a U.S. senator. We're voting for a mayor in the city of Baltimore, where I live. We're voting in some of our state, or in every state, we're voting for members of the House of Representatives. We're voting for governors in some states. We're voting for local elections in other states. And there are many states with ballot initiatives. And so when we talk about who are trusted voices, we know that there are spaces in our community where Delta chapters are the most trusted voice. And we want you to take that voice and continue to leverage it as we focus on what's next for the next 20 days. And while I think we heard today a lot of really powerful conversation about what connects to Black men, what connects to our brothers. And while we know we may not be the top line communicator to all of our brothers out there, we all know that there is that trusted Black man in your life, that Black man who looks to you to be the person that they go to for information, the one that they turn to and says to you, what do you think about this? And that is still an opportunity for us to influence our husbands, our brothers, our sons, our nephews, our cousins, our coworkers who know what we do, who know what Delta Women stand for, and know that you're a person they can trust for good information. And we want to make sure that we're doing that at every turn. And then lastly, as you also heard in the wrap up just now, our what's next does not stop in 20 days. We may sleep and take a nap in 20 days because we have worked ourselves as hard as we could on the front line for these next 20 days. But when we get back up from that rest, what we know is we have seen more clearly than ever the need for us to make sure we have a 4-year strategy, that we have an every year strategy when it comes to elections. In 2 more years, we'll be electing the entire House of Representatives again. We'll be electing another third of the U.S. Senate. And while there may not be a presidential election, there's always an election coming. Whatever we get past one, we know there's another one on the horizon. And so we will continue as Delta Sigma Theta to talk about, to plan, I would even say to plot about how we are going to continue to educate our young people about civics and government and how this all works, so that when we have that brother who we heard the story about who say, you know, why do you think there's propaganda? And he said, I don't really know what propaganda means. We want to make sure that we are empowering our folks, our family, our friends with information, our children, our gems, our Shabazz children, our embodied boys with that kind of information so that they can be the most engaged citizens that we can participate in raising as the women of Delta Sigma Theta. And so just know that your Social Action Commission will not check off the box and say, we're done with election 2024 come November 5th. You're going to continue to be part of an election conversation as we set a course for the sorority for how we treat elections between elections and make sure we're making the difference we need to. So Source, there's a lot to come next. And we can't wait to continue to see all of the work your chapters are doing, what you were doing in your individual capacity as we drive to November 5th with our swords on the front line, as we keep fortitude on the front line and make the impact that we know only Delta Sigma Theta can. Thank you all so much for being with us this evening, for participating in this conversation. Shout out to the people who've joined us on Vimeo, to the people who've joined us on Facebook. Thank you to all of the brothers who joined us for this conversation, for all of our sorors who brought your husbands, your sons, your cousins, your friends to the table to be a part of this. And again, a special shout out to our 3 participants and Mr. Cooper, Mr. Robinson, and Mr. Henderson for all of the jewels that you dropped for us today and for taking the time to be with us. I don't know if there's anyone else. I think I'm closing us out for the evening. So with that, I'm going to say thank you all for being here. Thank you for all of the reactions, the comments, and the hearts. And I'll see you on the front line. Thank you, Soros.
Thank you.
Night. Mr. Robinson, you mentioned 41 counties. Is that something you can send a note